Sometimes the people we've lost aren't gone. They're just waiting for someone to find them. And sometimes it takes a loyal dog to remind us that hope never truly dies. Silas Kendrick was 61 when his morning walk changed everything. He lived alone on his Texas homestead with his border collie, Flint. One morning, Flint ran toward a hidden canyon and wouldn't stop barking. Silas followed and found something he couldn't believe. 4 women were alive in a sunken valley no one knew existed. They'd been missing for years. Everyone thought they were dead. They had escaped from a remote compound, but couldn't climb out of the valley. How did they survive all that time? And what will happen now that they've been found? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning Silas Kendrick found those 4 women started like any other morning in the 3 years since his wife had passed. He woke at 5:30, made strong black coffee in the percolator that had sat on his stove for 2 decades, and carried his cup out to the porch while the sky shifted from black to deep purple to the pale orange of a Texas dawn. The homestead stretched out before him, 40 acres of dried pecan groves and rocky soil that had been in his family since his grandfather's time. The trees were gnarled and weathered, their branches reaching up like arthritic fingers, but they still produced enough pecans each fall to keep him busy. The work was good. It kept his hands occupied and his mind from wandering too far into the places grief liked to take him. Flint lay at his feet, a black and white border collie with intelligent eyes and a grey muzzle that matched Silas's own greying beard. The dog was 7 years old, a gift from his daughter in the year before his wife died. Back then, he hadn't wanted another responsibility. Now, Flint was the only living thing he spoke to most days. Silas took a slow sip of coffee and let the quiet settle around him. Out here, 15 miles from the nearest town of Brazos Bend, the silence was complete, except for the occasional cry of a hawk or the rustle of wind through dry grass. He'd grown up in Houston, spent 30 years working construction in cities across Texas, but after his wife got sick, they'd moved out here to her family's old place. She'd wanted to die somewhere peaceful. He'd honored that wish, and when she was gone, he'd stayed because leaving felt like abandoning her all over again. His phone sat on the wooden table beside him, silent. His daughter, Renna, called every Sunday evening without fail. She lived in Houston now, worked as a nurse at Memorial Hermann, and worried about him constantly. He could hear it in her voice every time they talked, the carefully casual questions about whether he was eating properly, whether he'd been to town recently, whether he was lonely. He was lonely. But he'd learned to carry it the way he carried everything else, quietly, without complaint, as a fact of his life rather than a problem that needed solving. At 6:15, he pulled on his boots, worn leatherwork boots with new laces he'd put in last month, and called to Flint. The dog was on his feet instantly, tail wagging, ready for their morning walk. They had a routine, down through the pecan groves, along the fence line, then back up toward the dried creek bed that marked the western edge of his property. 2 miles, give or take, enough to stretch his legs and check for any damage from the night before. The photograph in his shirt pocket pressed against his chest as he walked. He carried it everywhere, his wife Anne, taken on their 20th anniversary. She was laughing in the picture, her head thrown back, her hand on his arm. He didn't look at it every day anymore, but knowing it was there helped somehow. They walked in comfortable silence, Flint ranging, ahead and then circling back, nose to the ground, alert to every scent and sound. Silas had worked construction for most of his adult life, first as a laborer, then as a foreman, running crews on commercial projects across the state. He knew how to read blueprints, how to manage difficult personalities, how to solve problems with limited resources. Those skills hadn't disappeared just because he'd retired. They'd simply found new applications in fence repairs and irrigation fixes and the 100 small maintenance tasks that kept a homestead running. The land rolled gently here, broken occasionally by shallow ravines and clusters of mesquite trees. To the north, he could see the Mercer place, his nearest neighbor, half a mile away. Old Hank Mercer ran cattle and mostly kept to himself, which suited Silas fine. They'd wave if they passed each other on the county road, maybe stop to talk about weather or cattle prices, but neither man was inclined toward lengthy conversation. As they approached the western edge of the property, Silas noticed Flint's behavior change. The dog's ears went forward, his body tensed, and he took off at a run toward a narrow canyon Silas rarely visited. It was an ugly scar in the earth, choked with scrub brush and prickly pear, the kind of place that offered nothing but rattlesnakes and twisted ankles. "Flint!" Silas called, but the dog didn't stop. He could hear barking now, sharp, insistent, urgent. Not the playful bark Flint used when he'd treat a squirrel, but something else. Something that made the hair on Silas's arms stand up. Silas picked up his pace, his boots crunching on dry grass and loose rock. His knees protested. He'd banged them up pretty good over the years, carrying lumber and climbing scaffolding, but he ignored the discomfort. Flint was a smart dog. If something had him worked up like this, it was worth investigating. The canyon appeared suddenly, a narrow crack in the earth barely 6 feet wide at its opening, screened by a thick tangle of mesquite and juniper. Silas had been out here once or twice over the years, but he'd never gone far. The ground was unstable, the walls steep, and there was no good reason to risk a broken leg exploring it. Flint stood at the edge, barking into the depths, his whole body quivering with intensity. "What is it, boy?" Silas asked, moving carefully to the edge. The canyon was deeper than he'd realized, maybe 40 feet down to a narrow floor. But it wasn't just a simple crack. As he peered into it, he could see that it opened up about 20 feet down into something wider. A hidden valley of some kind, concealed from above by the way the rock walls curved inward. And there, in the shadows at the bottom, something moved. Silas froze, his heart suddenly pounding. His first thought was deer, or maybe a lost cow. But then the shapes resolved into something else entirely. People. 4 of them, standing in the dimness below, looking up at him, waving. His breath caught in his throat. They were women, he could tell that much, even from this distance. Thin, ragged, their clothes hanging off them like scarecrow rags. One of them was shouting something, but the words didn't carry up clearly. Silas's mind raced. This wasn't possible. There was nothing out here. No roads, no trails, no reason for anyone to be in this godforsaken crack in the earth. And yet there they were, real as the ground beneath his feet. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted down, "Are you hurt?" The response came back, thin and desperate. "Help us, please, we've been here so long." Silas stood at the canyon's edge, his mind trying to catch up with what his eyes were telling him. 4 women, alive, trapped in a hidden valley that shouldn't even exist. How long? He shouted down. The answer came back, broken by wind and distance. "Years! 3, maybe 4, we lost count." His hand went automatically to his phone, pulling it from his pocket. Out here, reception was spotty at best, but he had 2 bars. Enough. He dialed 911, his fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. 911. What's your emergency? My name is Silas Kendrick. I'm on my property about 15 miles west of Brazos Bend, and I've found 4 women trapped in a canyon. They say they've been there for years. There was a pause. "Sir, can you repeat that?" He did, more slowly this time, giving his address and the best directions he could manage. The dispatcher's skepticism was audible, but she took the information and promised to send units immediately. 45 minutes minimum, she told him. The location was remote, and they'd need to coordinate with search and rescue. 45 minutes. Silas looked down at the women again. They'd moved closer to the wall directly below him, their faces turned upward. Even from this distance, he could see how gaunt they were, how their movements were slow and careful, like people who'd learned to conserve every ounce of energy. He, made a decision. "I'm going to get some supplies from my truck," he called down. "Water and food. I'll be back in 10 minutes, don't go anywhere." One of them, a woman with long, tangled hair that might have once been blonde, laughed. It was a sound halfway between humor and despair. "We're not going anywhere." Silas ran back toward the house, Flint at his heels. His truck was parked near the barn, an old Ford F-150 with 200,000 miles on it, but an engine he'd maintained meticulously. In the bed, he kept a toolbox, an emergency supplies rope, a first aid kit, flares, things accumulated over decades of rural living and construction work. He grabbed a coil of climbing rope he'd used years ago for roof work, a canvas bag, and every bottle of water he could find. He added a box of granola bars from behind the seat and a thermal blanket. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his mind was spinning. 4 women. Years. The words didn't make sense together. Back at the canyon, he secured one end of the rope around a sturdy mesquite trunk and lowered the bag down carefully. The women grabbed it the moment it reached them, and he heard crying, not sad crying, but the sound of overwhelming relief. "Thank you." One of them called up, "Thank you, thank you. What are your names?" Silas asked. The blonde woman spoke first, her voice stronger now that she'd had water. "I'm Bridget. This is Constance, Faye, and Linnea." He committed the names to memory. "I'm Silas. Help is coming. Can you tell me how you got down there?" There was a long pause. Then Bridget spoke again, and her voice carried a weight that made Silas's chest tighten. "We escaped from a place, a compound, about 30 miles north of here. We ran, and we found this valley. We thought it was safe, thought we could hide here for a few days, and then figure out how to get to a town. But then there was a rock slide sealed off the only way we'd found to climb down. We tried everything. This Ford doctors out. The walls are too smooth, too high. We've been calling out for years, but nobody comes out here. Until you." Silas processed this information slowly. A compound. Escaped. The implications were dark and terrible. "The compound," he said carefully. "What kind of place was it?" "A bad place," another voice called up Constance. "Maybe, or Faye. A man who called himself a shepherd. He said he was saving us, but he was holding us prisoner." Before Silas could ask more, he heard vehicles approaching. The sheriff's department had made better time than promised. 2 trucks and an ambulance appeared on the dirt road that led to his property, kicking up clouds of dust. Sheriff Barnes climbed out first, a solid man in his 50s, with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who'd learned not to rush to judgment. Silas had met him a few times at the feed store in town. "Mr. Kendrick, dispatch said you found some people in a canyon?" 4 women. Down there." Silas pointed. Barnes approached. The edge carefully, looked down, and his expression changed completely. He turned and started barking orders. "Get search and rescue on the line. We need climbing gear and paramedics down there. Move!" The next hour was controlled chaos. More vehicles arrived, fire department, search and rescue, eventually news vans that someone must have tipped off. Silas stayed out of the way as professionals took over, setting up proper rigging and safety equipment. He watched as the first rescuer rappelled down into the valley. Watched as the paramedics followed. Watched as, one by one, the 4 women were brought up in rescue harnesses, blinking in the sunlight like people emerging from a cave. They were in worse shape up close. Their clothes were makeshift repairs of whatever they'd been wearing when they escaped, held together with plant fibers and strips of cloth. Their skin was weathered and marked with scars. Their hair was long and matted, but they were alive, and their eyes held a fierce intelligence that suffering hadn't extinguished. Bridget was brought up first. She was maybe late 30s, rail-thin, with sunburned skin and hands that were calloused and scarred. When she was clear of the canyon edge, she looked around wildly until she spotted Silas. She walked straight to him, wobbling slightly, and grabbed his hand. "You found us?" she said, and tears were streaming down her face. "After all this time, you found us." Silas didn't know what to say. He just nodded and held her hand while the paramedics tried to lead her to the ambulance. Constance came up next, then Faye, then Linnea. Each one looked at him with the same expression, gratitude, mixed with disbelief, as if they couldn't quite accept that this was real. The paramedics worked quickly, checking vitals, starting IVs, asking questions. Sheriff Barnes was on his radio, his voice tense as he coordinated with what sounded like federal authorities. The words survivalist compound and possible abduction drifted over. A reporter tried to approach Silas, microphone extended, but he waved her off. He didn't want to talk, didn't want cameras pointed at him. He'd just been walking his dog. As the ambulances pulled away, sirens wailing, Sheriff Barnes approached. "We're going to need a full statement from you, Mr. Kendrick. And we'll need to search that valley, see what evidence is down there." "Whatever you need," Silas said. Barnes studied him. "You did a good thing today. Those women will have to confirm identities, but if they've been missing as long as they say, there are families who've been grieving for years." Silas nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him hollow and shaky. He drove home slowly, Flint beside him in the cab. The dog's worn leather collar was visible in his peripheral vision, and Silas reached over to scratch behind his ears. "Good boy," he said quietly. "Good boy." The phone started ringing at 6 the next morning. Silas ignored the first 3 calls, but by the 4th, he picked up out of sheer frustration. "Mr. Kendrick, this is Jennifer Ortiz from Channel 9 News. We'd love to get your perspective on the incredible rescue." He hung up without a word. By noon, there were 7 news vans parked along the county road near his property. Reporters had somehow gotten his cell number, his landline, probably his social security number for all he knew. They wanted interviews, wanted him to recount the discovery, wanted to make him into some kind of hero. He wasn't a hero. He'd just followed his dog. Renna called at 1 o'clock, her voice tight with worry and excitement. "Dad, I saw you on the news. Why didn't you call me? It only happened yesterday," he said, carrying the phone out to the porch where Flint lay in a patch of shade. "I left you a message saying you'd found some people and had to deal with the police. You didn't mention it was 4 missing women who'd been trapped for years. Dad, this is national news." He could hear the pride in her voice beneath the concern, and it made him uncomfortable. "It's not that big a deal, Renna. Not that, Dad. You saved their lives. I found them. The paramedics and search and rescue saved their lives." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm driving out there tomorrow, Friday. I already asked for the day off. You don't need to do that. I know I don't need to. I want to. I haven't seen you in 2 months, and apparently you're having major life events without telling me." Despite himself, Silas smiled. "You're stubborn. I learned from the best. I'll be there around 10. Don't cook anything. I'm bringing lunch." After she hung up, he sat on the porch and tried to return to normal. But normal had been disrupted in ways he was only beginning to understand. His quiet life, the careful routine he'd built to manage his grief and his solitude, had been cracked open like those canyon walls. He thought about the 4 women, wondered if they were still in the hospital, what the doctors were finding, whether their families had been contacted. Sheriff Barnes had told him they'd need formal statements, but so far no one had called to schedule anything. Instead of dwelling on it, he did what he always did when his mind was restless. He worked. There was a section of fence on the eastern border that needed repair, posts rotting out after years of weather. He loaded his truck with new posts and wire and spent the afternoon digging and setting and stretching until his shoulders ached and his hands were raw. Flint stayed close, more attentive than usual, as if he sensed that something had shifted in their world. That evening, Silas drove into Brazos Bend for supplies. The town was small, 1 main street with a feed store, a diner, a gas station, and not much else. He'd been coming here for 3 years, and most people knew him by sight, but they left him alone. He was the quiet widower who kept to himself, and that was fine. With everyone. Tonight was different. He'd barely stepped into Harmon's feed and supply when Carl Harmon came out from behind the counter, hand extended, grin wide. "Silas! Saw you on the news, buddy. Incredible thing you did out there." Silas shook his hand reluctantly. "Just happened to be walking." "Still, 4 women. Years they were down there." Carl shook his head. "Makes you think, doesn't it? All the things we pass by every day without knowing." Other customers were looking over now, and Silas felt the weight of their attention. He mumbled something non-committal and grabbed the supplies he needed, dog food, coffee, batteries, and got out as quickly as he could. But it was the same at the gas station. The same at the diner where he sometimes got breakfast. People wanted to talk, wanted to hear the story firsthand, wanted to tell him what a good thing he'd done. He drove home feeling more exhausted than he had after a full day of fence work. Friday morning, Rena arrived exactly. At 10, her Honda Civic kicking up dust on the long driveway. She got out carrying grocery bags and a container of what smelled like her famous chicken enchiladas and wrapped him in a hug before he could protest. "You look tired," she said, studying his face. "I am tired. The reporters still bothering you? They're camped on the road." I stopped answering the phone. She set the food on the kitchen counter and looked around the house. It was clean, he kept it clean but sparse. The furniture was old, the decorations minimal. The only photograph on display was one of Rena's college graduation. Everything else of Anne's he'd packed away because seeing it every day had been too hard. "How are you really doing with all this?" Rena asked, pouring herself coffee from the pot he'd made that morning. Silas sat at the kitchen table, Flint settling at his feet. "I don't know. It doesn't feel real yet. You saved 4 people's lives, Dad. That's real. I found them. There's a difference." Rena sat across from him, her nurse's eyes assessing him the way they probably assessed her patients. "You've been out here alone for 3 years. You go days without talking to anyone but Flint, and now suddenly you're the center of this huge story and people want things from you. That's got to be overwhelming." He nodded slowly. She understood. She'd always understood him better than anyone except Anne. "The women," he said, "Bridget and the others. Have you heard anything about them?" "I checked with some people at the hospital. They're stable, malnourished, dehydrated, some old injuries that healed wrong. But they're going to be okay physically. The psychological stuff that'll take longer. They said they escaped from a compound. Some kind of survivalist group." Rena's expression darkened. "I saw that in the news. The FBI's involved now. They're trying to track down whoever ran the place." Silas thought about Bridget's voice when she'd called up from the valley. The way she'd said, "a bad place." The fear that had been audible even through the gratitude. "I want to see them," he said suddenly. "The women. Make sure they're all right. The hospital's being careful about visitors. Family only, mostly. There's a lot of media pressure. Could you find out if they'd be willing to see me? Just for a few minutes." Rena reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'll see what I can do." They spent the afternoon together, and for a few hours things felt almost normal. They ate lunch on the porch, walked through the pecan groves, talked about her work and the house she was saving up to buy. She didn't push him to talk more about the rescue, and he was grateful for that. But when she left that evening, the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Silas sat on the porch as the sun set, Flint beside him, and pulled out the photograph of Anne. He looked at it for a long time, at her laughing face, and wondered what she would have made of all this. She'd always been the brave one, the one who reached out to people, who got involved. He'd been content to work quietly in the background. Now the background had been stripped away, and he didn't know what came next. 3 days after the rescue, Rena called with news. The women had asked to see him. Bridget specifically had requested it, and the hospital administrators, in consultation with the FBI, had agreed to allow a brief visit. Silas drove to Brazos, County Medical Center on Tuesday morning, taking back roads to avoid the news crews that were still occasionally prowling near his property. The hospital was a modern building on the edge of town, 3 stories of brick and glass that served 4 surrounding counties. Rena met him in the lobby. She'd arranged to be there on her day off, knowing he'd need someone to navigate the bureaucracy and the security that now surrounded the 4 women. "They're on the 3rd floor," she said, guiding him to the elevators. "Private. Wing. There's an FBI agent stationed outside, so don't be surprised." He wasn't. When they reached the 3rd floor, a young man in a dark suit checked Silas's ID against a list and then nodded them through. The room was large, clearly meant for a single patient, but now housing all 4 women. They'd wanted to stay together, Rena had explained. After years of shared survival, separation felt wrong. Bridget was sitting up in the bed nearest the window. Her hair had been washed and cut short, and she wore a clean hospital gown. She still looked thin, they all did, but there was color in her face now, and her eyes were clear. "Mr. Kendrick," she said, and her voice was stronger than it had been in the canyon. "You came. Call me Silas." He stood awkwardly near the door, aware of the other 3 women watching him. "I wanted to make sure you were all doing okay. Because of you, we're alive." Constance spoke from the second bed. She was older than Bridget, maybe mid-40s, with grey-streaked brown hair and hands that moved constantly, as if she couldn't quite believe she was allowed to touch things freely. Faye, in the 3rd bed, nodded. She was closest to Silas's age, with a weathered face that suggested she'd lived a hard life even before the compound. "We thought we were going to die in that valley. Every day we thought maybe this would be the day someone would come. But after the 1st year, we stopped believing it." The youngest, Linnea, didn't speak. She just watched Silas with large, dark eyes that held depths of trauma he couldn't begin to fathom. "How did you survive?" Silas asked. 4 years with no supplies, no help." 3 years and 8 months, Bridget corrected. "We counted as best we could. And we survived because we didn't have a choice. There was rainwater, the valley had a natural collection point in the rocks, wild plants, some edible. Small animals we could trap. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us breathing." She gestured to a wooden object on the table beside her bed, the crude cross he'd heard about from the FBI report. "We made that in the 2nd year, marked it with the date we thought it was. We'd pray over it every morning, asking for someone to find us. Some days, that was the only thing that kept us going." Silas moved closer, studying the cross. It was remarkably well made, given the circumstances, carved from a piece of cedar, bound with woven grass fibers. "The FBI said you escaped from a compound," he said carefully. "They asked me questions about it, but I didn't know what to tell them." The women exchanged glances. Finally, Bridget spoke. "His name was Shepherd Kine. That's what he made us call him, Shepherd. He ran a place called the Covenant of the New Earth, about 30 miles north of where you found us. It started as a church, or at least that's how he presented it. A place for people who were lost, who needed community and purpose. He was good at finding vulnerable people," Constance added bitterly. "I'd just lost my husband." Faye was recovering from addiction. Linnea had aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. And Bridget, "I'd left an abusive marriage," Bridget finished. "I was working 2 jobs, sleeping in my car between shifts. When Kine's people approached me at a diner, offering a safe place to stay and a community that would support me, it sounded like a miracle." "It was a trap," Faye said flatly. Silas pulled up a chair, sensing this was a story they needed to tell. Rena stood quietly near the door, witnessing but not interfering. "At first it was good," Bridget continued. "We had work to do, but it felt meaningful. We grew food, maintained the buildings, studied scripture. Kine was charismatic, persuasive. He made you feel like you were part of something important, something chosen. But then the rules started, Constance said. Slowly at first. We couldn't contact family, he said. They'd try to pull us away from our purpose. We couldn't leave the compound without permission. We had to attend his teachings every day, sometimes twice a day. He'd talk for hours about how the world was corrupt, how we were the select few who understood the truth. He took our phones, our identification, our money, Faye said. Said we didn't need those things anymore, that the compound would provide everything. By the time we realized what was happening, we were trapped. There were guards, high fences, and he had a way of making you doubt yourself, making you think that if you wanted to leave, it meant you were weak, that you were betraying everyone. Linnea spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. He said our families didn't want us anymore, that they were relieved we were gone. Silas felt anger building in his chest. How did you get out? Supply run, Bridget said. Once a month, a few of us were allowed to go into town for supplies. Always supervised, always watched. But 4 years ago, she paused, calculating. 4 years ago, there was confusion. One of the other members had a medical emergency. The guard who was supposed to watch us got called back to help. We saw our chance, and we ran. We had maybe 20 minutes before they'd realize we were gone, Constance said. We ran into the wilderness. No plan, no supplies, just ran. We could hear them searching, hear the vehicles. So we kept going deeper into the back country. We found the valley by accident, Faye said. Thought we'd hide there for a day or two, then figure out how to get to a road, flag down help. But that night, there was a storm. Lightning, thunder, heavy rain. And the rocks they just came down blocked the only way we'd found to climb into the valley. We tried everything, Bridget said, and her voice cracked slightly. We tried to move the rocks, but they were too big. We tried to climb the walls, but they were too smooth, too high. We screamed until our voices gave out. And then we just had to figure out how to survive. Because maybe someone would come. Maybe. The room was quiet. Silas could hear the beep of monitors, the distant sound of hospital announcements, the whisper of his own breathing. You stayed together, he said finally. We had to, Constance said simply. Alone, any one of us would have died in the first month. Together, we could divide tasks. One person collects water, another forages, another tends the fire, another watches for signs of help. We kept each other sane, kept each other human. Silas left the hospital with more questions than answers. Renna walked him to his truck, her face troubled. That man, Kine, she said. The FBI is looking for him, right? I assume so, Silas replied, unlocking the door. Sheriff Barnes said they were investigating. Dad, be careful. If he finds out you're the one who found them, I'm just a man who was walking his dog. I'm nobody to him. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. Back home, Silas tried to return to his routines, but concentration eluded him. He kept thinking about what Bridget had told him, about the years they'd spent in that valley, about the man who'd imprisoned them in the first place. That evening, he did something he rarely did. He opened his laptop and started searching. The internet connection was slow out here, running off a satellite dish, but it worked well enough. He typed Shepherd Kine, Covenant of the New Earth into the search engine. The results were sparse but disturbing. News articles from 2019 and 2020 about missing persons cases. 4 women who disappeared without a trace, all connected to the same small church outside Brazos Bend. Families desperate for answers. Police investigations that went nowhere because the compound had been abandoned by the time authorities got a warrant to search it. There were photographs of the women from before Bridget, smiling at a company picnic, Constance with her late husband, Faye's mugshot from a drug arrest years earlier, Linnea's foster care photo with haunted eyes even then. And there was one photograph of Shepherd Kine himself, taken from some promotional material for the Covenant. He was younger in the picture, maybe late 40s, with sharp features and intense eyes. He wore simple clothes and a silver medallion around his neck. The caption identified him as spiritual leader and found her. Silas studied the face for a long time, committing it to memory. The next morning, Sheriff Barnes called. "Mr. Kendrick, I need you to come down to the station. FBI wants to interview you formally about the rescue and anything the women might have told you." The Brazos Bend Sheriff's Office was a small building next to the courthouse, with 3 deputies and a secretary who'd worked there since before Silas was born. The FBI agents were obvious the moment he walked in, too polished, too serious, their suits too expensive for small-town Texas. Agent Howell was a woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back severely. Agent Park was younger, Korean-American, with the build of someone who spent serious time at the gym. They led Silas into an interview room and spent 2 hours asking detailed questions about the rescue, the valley's location, anything the women had said to him. "We've confirmed the identities of all 4 women," Howell said. "They match missing persons cases from 2019 through 2021. Their families have been notified and are making arrangements to see them." "What about Kine?" Silas asked. The agents exchanged a look. "What about him?" Park said carefully. "Is he in custody? Are you looking for him?" "We can't discuss an ongoing investigation," Howell said. "But I can tell you that we take these cases very seriously. The compound was abandoned years ago, but we're pursuing all leads." It wasn't an answer, and Silas knew it. "Mr. Kendrick," Howell continued, "have you noticed anything unusual around your property? Unfamiliar vehicles, people you don't recognize, anything out of the ordinary?" A chill ran down his spine. "No. Should I be worried? Just being thorough. Men like Kine, when they lose control of people they consider their property, they sometimes attempt to reassert that control. It's unlikely he'd approach you directly, but we want you to be aware and vigilant." They gave him a card with emergency numbers and told him to call immediately if he saw anything suspicious. Then they thanked him for his time and let him go. Silas drove home slowly, thinking about the word property. That's how Kine had seen those women, not as people, but as possessions. And now they'd been taken from him. Over the next week, life tried to settle into something resembling normal. The news vans eventually left, moving on to other stories. The phone calls became less frequent. Silas worked on his land, walked with Flint, avoided town except when necessary. But something had changed in him. The isolation that had felt like protection now felt like vulnerability. He found himself checking the perimeter of his property more often, noticing things he'd ignored before: tire tracks on the county road, the sound of vehicles passing in the night, shadows that might or might not be there. He started keeping his father's service revolver closer. It was a .38 Special, maintained but rarely fired, kept in a locked box in his bedroom. Now he moved it to the kitchen drawer, loaded, within easy reach. Rena noticed during her next visit. "Dad, what's going on?" "Nothing, just being careful." "This is about what the FBI said, isn't it? About Kine?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Maybe you should come stay with me for a while," she suggested. "Just until they catch him. This is my home, Rena. I'm not leaving it." "You're being stubborn." "I'm being practical. Running away won't solve anything." She left frustrated, but he couldn't explain to her what he barely understood himself, that leaving felt like the first step toward losing everything. He'd already lost Anne. He'd already lost the life they'd built together. This land, this homestead, was all he had left that felt solid and real. 2 weeks after the rescue, Bridget called him. She'd been released from the hospital and was staying with her sister in Austin while she recovered and worked with therapists. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, properly, without tubes and monitors and FBI agents listening. "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You gave us our lives back, Silas. All of us. We were ready to die in that valley." There was a pause, and then her voice changed, became more serious. "I need to tell you something. The FBI doesn't want us talking about it, but you deserve to know. Kaine is still out there. They found evidence that he started another group, somewhere in New Mexico or Arizona. He's using a different name, but it's him. Silas's grip tightened on the par. Bone. Does he know about the rescue? About me? I don't know. But the FBI thinks he's been following the news coverage. Silas, if he sees you as the person who took us from him, men like him don't let that go. They don't forgive. They punish. I can take care of myself. I know you can. But promise me you'll be careful. Please. After they hung up, Silas stood on his porch and looked out at the empty land. The pecan groves stretched away in all directions, peaceful and quiet. But that peace felt fragile now, like something that could shatter at any moment. Flint pressed against his leg, sensing his unease. "It's all right, boy," Silas said, reaching down to scratch the dog's ears, but he wasn't sure it was. The note appeared on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the rescue. Silas found it tucked under the windshield wiper of his truck when he came out to drive into town for supplies. A single sheet of white paper, folded once, with his name written on the outside in careful, elegant handwriting. He looked around instinctively. The morning was quiet, the land empty as far as he could see. No vehicles on the county road, no movement in the distance. Just the wind and the rustling of dry grass. He unfolded the paper with steady hands, though his heart was racing. "Mr. Kendrick, you have interfered in matters beyond your understanding. The lost have been found, but they belong to a greater purpose. What you call rescue, I call theft. What you call freedom, I call abandonment of sacred duty. I do not expect you to comprehend the work I do, but I expect you to respect it. Return what was taken, and there will be no consequences. Refuse, and you will learn that some shepherds defend their flock with more than words. You have until Sunday. S.K." Silas read it twice, then immediately pulled out his phone and called the FBI number Agent Howell had given him. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Kendrick? He left a note on my truck. Kaine. He wants me to return the women by Sunday. Don't touch it anymore. We're sending someone out immediately. Is the note still there? I'm holding it. Set it down somewhere safe and step away. Don't touch your truck. Don't touch anything else. We need to process it for prints and DNA." Within an hour, his property was swarming with federal agents. They photographed the note, bagged it as evidence, dusted his truck for prints, searched the perimeter for any sign of how Kane or his people had approached without being seen. Agent Park interviewed him while the search continued. "Did you see anyone? Hear anything unusual last night?" "Nothing. I sleep light these days, and Flint would have barked if someone came close to the house. Which means whoever left this was careful, professional. They knew how to move without detection." Howell joined them on the porch, her expression grim. "We're putting you under protection, Mr. Kendrick. 24-hour surveillance, at least until we locate Kaine. I don't need... This isn't a request. He's made a direct threat. He knows where you live. And if his pattern holds, he's not making empty promises." "What pattern?" She hesitated, then seemed to decide he deserved the truth. "We've been tracking Kaine for 6 years. The Covenant of the New Earth was just his latest operation. Before that, there were 2 other groups, both in different states. Both ended when people tried to leave or when authorities got too close. In one case, a social worker who'd been investigating complaints disappeared. Her body was found 3 months later in a ravine. We could never prove Kaine was responsible, but the circumstantial evidence was strong. Silas felt the weight of that information settle on him. "You're saying he's killed before. I'm saying he's dangerous, and he views challenges to his authority as existential threats. You didn't just find 4 women, Mr. Kendrick. You publicly humiliated him. You proved he's not infallible, not all-powerful. Men like him can't tolerate that." A deputy sheriff arrived and set up position at the end of Silas's driveway. Another agent would patrol the perimeter at night. They installed security cameras at key points around the property and gave Silas a panic button that would bring immediate response. His quiet life had become a armed camp. Renner arrived that evening, ignoring his protests. "I'm staying until this is over. And before you argue, remember that I'm a 34-year-old woman who makes her own decisions." She'd inherited his stubbornness, along with his dark hair and his talent for fixing things. He knew better than to fight her when she'd made up her mind. They sat on the porch, after dark, Flint between them, watching the deputy's patrol car make slow circuits of the property line. "Tell me about Mom," Renner said suddenly. Silas looked at her, surprised. They didn't talk about Anne often. The wound was still too raw for him, even after 3 years. "What do you want to know? How you met? You've never really told me the whole story." He was quiet for a moment, reaching into his shirt pocket for the photograph he always carried. In the dim porch light, Anne's face was barely visible, but he'd memorized every detail long ago. "I was working construction in Houston. She was a teacher at the elementary school near the job site. We'd see each other at the coffee shop between. She'd be there during her lunch break. I'd stop in before the afternoon shift. One day, she was reading a book about Texas history, and I made some comment about it. We started talking. That was it." "That was it?" Renner smiled. "Come on, there has to be more. She was smart, funny. She didn't take any nonsense from anyone, including me. When she got sick," his voice caught slightly, "she faced it the same way she faced everything, with courage and grace and no self-pity. She made me promise I wouldn't waste time feeling sorry for myself after she was gone. Are you keeping that promise?" He didn't answer immediately. Was he? He'd survived the last 3 years, but had he lived them? Or had he just been going through motions, walking his land, maintaining his routines, waiting for time to pass? "I don't know," he admitted finally. Renner leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think she'd be proud of you. What you did, finding those women, that took courage too. I just followed Flint. You could have ignored him, called someone else. But you climbed down there yourself, you talked to them, you made sure they were safe. That's who you are, Dad. That's who you've always been, even when you're trying to hide from it." They sat in comfortable silence, father and daughter, while the night deepened around them and the patrol car's headlights swept past at regular intervals. Inside, Silas's phone buzzed, a text from Bridget. "FBI told me about the note. I'm so sorry. This is my fault," he typed back slowly, unused to the phone's small keyboard. "Not your fault. His fault. Stay safe." Her response came quickly. "You too. We're all praying for you." Silas thought about the wooden cross they'd carved in the valley, about the faith that had kept them alive when hope seemed impossible. He wasn't a particularly religious man, his wife had been the believer in their marriage, but he understood the need for something to hold on to when darkness closed in. He reached down and scratched Flint's ears. The dog looked up at him with complete trust, complete loyalty. "Good boy," Silas murmured. "You started all this. You know that?" Flint's tail thumped once against the porch boards. Sunday was 4 days away. Sunday came with a heat that pressed down like a weight. Silas woke before dawn, as he always did, but this morning felt different. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Agent Park was on watch, sitting in an unmarked sedan near the barn. He raised a hand in greeting when Silas came out with coffee. Renner was still asleep in the guest room, and Flint was unusually restless, pacing between the porch and the yard. Nothing happened in the morning. Nothing happened at noon. The FBI agents rotated shifts, maintained their perimeter, watched and waited. Silas tried to work, tried to occupy his mind with fence repairs and equipment maintenance, but concentration eluded him. By late afternoon, he was standing on the porch with Agent Howell, discussing whether the deadline had been a bluff, when his phone rang. Unknown number. Howell nodded for him to answer. The call was being recorded. Mr. Kendrick. The voice was smooth, cultured, with the faint remnant of an East Coast accent. I trust you received my message. Kine. Shepherd Kine, if you please. Titles matter, Mr. Kendrick. They denote respect, hierarchy, order. Things your generation understood once, before the world lost its way. Silas kept his voice steady. I'm not returning those women to you. They're not property. They're human beings who chose to be. Free. A soft laugh. Choice. Such a modern delusion. Do children choose to need guidance? Do the lost choose to need a shepherd? I offered them purpose, community, salvation from their broken lives. And you returned them to a world that chewed them up and spat them out once already. You call that rescue? I call it freedom. Freedom is just another word for abandonment, Mr. Kendrick. Freedom to starve, to fail, to die alone and unmourned. I gave them something better. I gave them belonging. You gave them a prison. The voice hardened. I gave them everything, and you took it away. Do you know what that makes you? Not a hero, a thief, a destroyer of sacred things. Howell was signaling frantically, mouthing, "Keep him talking," while other agents worked to trace the call. If they wanted to be with you, they wouldn't have run, Silas said. They were confused, frightened. The weak often are when faced with transformation. But that's temporary, Mr. Kendrick. What I built, what we built together, that's eternal. And it will be rebuilt, with or without them. Though I'd prefer with. The flock is incomplete without its lost sheep. They're not coming back. Silence for a moment. When Kane spoke again, his tone had shifted, still smooth, but with an edge underneath like a blade wrapped in silk. I've researched you, Mr. Kendrick. Widower, retired construction foreman. One daughter, works at Memorial Hermann in Houston. Lives alone on 40 acres with a dog named Flint. You think the FBI can protect you? They can't even find me. You think your isolation keeps you safe? Isolation makes you vulnerable. Silas felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. If you're trying to scare me, I'm not trying anything. I'm stating facts. You took something that belonged to me. There are consequences for theft, Mr. Kendrick. Natural consequences, karmic consequences, divine consequences. The universe demands balance. The universe doesn't care about your ego. Another laugh, colder this time. Brave words from a man who lost his wife 3 years ago and hasn't moved on, who lives in the past, clutching a photograph in his pocket, going through motions instead of living. You judge me? At least I build. At least I create. What do you do, Mr. Kendrick? You exist. You survive. Like a plant, like a stone. That's not living. That's just waiting to die. The words hit harder than Silas wanted to admit, cutting close to thoughts he'd had himself in dark moments. You're right about one thing, Silas said quietly. I have been just surviving. But you know what? Finding those women that reminded me what living looks like. It looks like people helping each other. It looks like standing up to bullies who hide behind religion and charisma. It looks like saying no to men who think they have the right to control others. Eloquent, but ultimately meaningless. You had until today, Mr. Kendrick. You chose defiance. Now you'll learn what that costs. The line went dead. Howell lowered her phone, her face tight. We got a partial trace. Cell tower about 20 miles north, but he was using a burner, and he's already off the network. He knows about Renner, Silas said, the fear finally breaking through his calm. He mentioned her specifically. Her job, where she works. We'll put protection on her immediately. Round the clock. Silas turned and went inside, finding Renner in the kitchen making sandwiches. She took one look at his face and set down the knife. What happened? He told her. Watched her face go pale, then set with determination that was pure and that refusal to be cowed, that stubborn strength. I'm not running, she said. And neither are you, Renner. No, I know what you're going to say, that I should go back to Houston, stay with friends, hide, but I'm not leaving you here alone. We're family. That means we face things together." Agent Park came in, overhearing the last part. "Actually, Miss Kendrick, we'd strongly advise you to accept protective custody. If Kine is focusing on you to pressure your father, then me leaving makes my father vulnerable in a different way," Renner interrupted. "He'll be worried about me, distracted. I'm safer here, with you all watching, than I am isolated somewhere else." The agents exchanged glances, then Howell nodded reluctantly. "We'll need to implement additional security measures, and at the first sign of an actual threat, this discussion is over." That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the house settle, to Flint's breathing from the floor beside him, to the occasional crackle of radio communication from the agents outside. He thought about what Kine had said about just surviving instead of living, about clutching the past instead of moving forward. The words stung because they held truth. He had been going through motions, had been treating life as something to endure rather than engage with, but he'd also learned something in the past 3 weeks. Purpose didn't announce itself with trumpets. It came quietly, in a dog's persistent barking, in the choice to climb down into a canyon, in the decision to stand firm when threatened. He reached over and picked up the photograph of Anne from his nightstand. In the darkness, he couldn't see her face, but he didn't need to. "I'm trying," he whispered to her memory. "I know I haven't been doing great at it, but I'm trying." Flint shifted on the floor, and Silas reached down to rest his hand on the dog's back, taking comfort in the simple warmth of a living creature that trusted him completely. Outside, the night was quiet. But it was the kind of quiet that felt temporary, like the pause between thunderclaps. The attack came on Wednesday, not with violence, but with precision. Silas was in the barn, repairing a broken bridle when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "Check your email." He pulled up his email on the phone, hands suddenly unsteady. The message had no subject line, just an attachment. Against his better judgment, he opened it. It was a photograph. Recent. High resolution. It showed Renner leaving Memorial Hermann Hospital in her scrubs, heading toward her car in the parking garage. The timestamp was from 2 days ago, before she'd come to stay with him. The message below the photo was brief. She was so easy to find, so easy to watch, so easy to reach. "You still have time to make this right." Silas's vision tunneled. He forwarded the email to Howell immediately and walked back to the house on legs that felt unsteady. The FBI response was swift and overwhelming. Within hours, agents were coordinating with Houston PD, reviewing security footage from the hospital, tracing the email's origin. Renner was shaken but trying to hide it, her nurse's composure cracking around the edges. "He was watching me," she said quietly. "For how long?" "We don't know," Howell admitted. "The email was sent through multiple proxy servers, very sophisticated. This isn't some amateur operation. Agent Park had news by evening. We found something. Kine has been using intermediaries, people who don't know who they're really working for. He hires them through dark web marketplaces, gives them specific tasks, pays in cryptocurrency. The person who took that photo was probably just some private investigator who thought he was doing routine surveillance." "Can you trace it back to Kine?" Silas asked. "We're trying, but he's careful. Layers upon layers of separation." That night, Silas sat in his kitchen with his father's revolver on the table in front of him. He'd cleaned it earlier, loaded it, checked the action. The weight of it was familiar. His father had taught him to shoot when he was 12, emphasizing respect for the weapon and responsibility for every round fired. He'd never imagined pointing it at another human being. Renner came in, saw the gun, and sat down across from him without comment. She'd grown up around firearms. This was Texas, and their family had always treated guns as tools that required knowledge and caution. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Yes, me too." They sat in silence for a while. Then Renner said, "Tell me about the women, the ones you found. What are they like? Silas thought about Bridget's fierce gratitude, Constance's nervous hands, Faye's weathered wisdom, Linnea's watchful silence. Survivors, he said finally. They went through hell and came out the other side still human, still capable of hope. That takes a kind of strength most people never have to find in themselves. Like Mom, yeah. Like your mom. Renner reached across and squeezed his hand. We're going to be okay, Dad. Kine is just trying to scare us. He's not going to actually do anything. Silas wanted to believe that. But he'd heard the certainty in Kine's voice, the absolute conviction that he was owed something and would collect that debt one way or another. The next morning brought another message. This time it was a package, left on the porch sometime during the night, despite the FBI surveillance. Agent Park found it during his dawn perimeter check. Inside was a silver medallion on a chain, engraved with the words, "The Shepherd Protects," and a note in that same elegant handwriting, "This was mine, now it's yours." A reminder that we're connected now. You and I. What I build, you tried to destroy. What you love, I can reach. Consider carefully what matters more, your pride or your daughter's safety. The choice is yours, always has been. Howell examined the medallion with gloved hands. This is evidence. We can use it. DNA. Fingerprints. He wouldn't have sent it if it had anything traceable, Silas said. He's too smart for that. He was right. The medallion and note came back clean, wiped, sterile, untraceable. But Silas kept the medallion anyway. He put it in his pocket opposite the photograph of Anne, a reminder of what he was facing and why it mattered. That afternoon, Bridget called. I heard about the threats. Silas, you have to know none of us would blame you if you wanted to step back from this. If you wanted to distance yourself. I'm not stepping back. He's dangerous, more dangerous than you know. He doesn't just threaten, he follows through. People who crossed him at the other compounds, people who tried to expose him, they had accidents, house fires, car crashes, things that looked random but weren't. Then why haven't the FBI arrested him? Because he's smart enough to never be directly connected. He has followers who do anything for him, who believe he's genuinely chosen by God. They act on his wishes without him ever giving explicit orders. That's how he operates. After she hung up, Silas stood on his porch looking out at his land. 40 acres his grandfather had worked, that his wife had loved, that he'd planned to leave to Renner someday. It was just dirt and rocks and scrubby trees, but it was his. It represented something: continuity, legacy, the quiet determination to build a life and maintain it. Cain wanted him to give that up, wanted him to bow, to submit, to acknowledge that some men had the right to control others, and everyone else should just step aside. Silas thought about his father, who'd been a sheriff in a small town north of here. His father had taught him that standing up to bullies wasn't about being fearless, it was about being more afraid of what happened if you didn't stand up. I'm not running, he said aloud, though no one but Flint was there to hear. Not from my home, not from my life, not from him. Flint looked up at him and wagged his tail, and somehow that simple gesture of canine loyalty was exactly what Silas needed. Inside, Renner was on the phone with her supervisor, arranging extended leave from work. Agent Howell was coordinating with her team, planning next steps. And somewhere out there, Shepard Kane was planning too. The confrontation came on Friday, exactly 1 week after the deadline Kine had set. Silas was checking the fence line near the eastern border when he saw the vehicle, a dusty sedan parked on the county road about 100 yards from his property. A man stood beside it, arms crossed, watching. He wasn't hiding. That was the point. He wanted to be seen. Silas pulled out his phone and took a photo, then sent it to Agent Park. The response came back immediately. Stay where you are. We're coming to you. But the man was already walking toward him, hands visible and empty, moving with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Silas stood his ground, one hand near the pocket where he'd started carrying his father's revolver. Flint growled low in his throat, a sound Silas had rarely heard from the normally gentle dog. The man stopped about 20 feet away. He was younger than Silas expected, maybe mid-30s, with a lean build and the kind of weathered face that came from outdoor work. He wore jeans, boots, and a plain shirt, nothing threatening, nothing remarkable. "Mr. Kendrick," he said, his voice mild, "the shepherd would like to meet with you. In person, just the two of you. I'm not interested in meeting with Kine. He thought you might say that, so he asked me to deliver a message." The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes were watchful, calculating. "He knows you have federal protection. He knows they're listening to your calls, reading your emails, watching your property. He knows they think they can keep you safe." The man smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "But Mr. Kendrick, how long can that last? Weeks? Months? Eventually the FBI will have to pull resources. Eventually you'll be alone again. And the shepherd is a patient man. He can wait. He's good at waiting. But the question is, can you live like this indefinitely, looking over your shoulder, worrying about your daughter every time she goes to work? Is that a threat? It's a reality. But it doesn't have to be your reality. Meet with him. One conversation, neutral ground, the old grain mill off Route 47, tonight at sunset. Come alone, and he promises you'll walk away unharmed. Refuse, and, he shrugged, well, the shepherd protects his flock. By any means necessary, and that includes dealing with threats to his mission. 2 FBI vehicles came racing up the road, kicking up dust. The man didn't run. He just stood there, still smiling that empty smile, as agents jumped out with weapons drawn. "On the ground! Now!" The man complied immediately, moving slowly and deliberately. "I'm just a messenger," he said calmly as they cuffed him. "I haven't broken any laws. I delivered an invitation. That's all. You can check I'm not armed. I haven't threatened anyone. I simply passed along a request for a meeting." Agent Park searched him, no weapons, no ID, nothing but a burner phone with a single contact saved. The phone rang as they were bagging it as evidence. Park answered on speaker. "This is FBI Special Agent Park." Kine's voice came through clear and confident. "Agent Park, good afternoon. I trust you're treating my associate with respect. He's a law-abiding citizen who volunteered to deliver a message for me. Nothing illegal about that. We're detaining him for questioning. On what charges? He delivered a message. That's not a crime. Unless the FBI has decided that free speech no longer applies in Texas, I'd hate to have to contact my attorneys about civil rights violations." Howell had arrived and took the phone. "Mr. Kane, you need to stop this. Making threats against a witness. I've made no threats, Agent Howell. I've extended an invitation for a conversation between 2 adults, man to man. No lawyers, no agents, no recording devices, just 2 people talking honestly about a situation that's gotten out of hand. If Mr. Kendrick chooses not to accept, that's his right. Just as it's my right to continue living my life and pursuing my ministry. Your ministry involves kidnapping and false imprisonment. Your allegations involve no evidence and no charges. I've never been convicted of anything, Agent Howell. Never even been arrested. Your investigation has been ongoing for years and produced nothing. At what point does harassment become the real crime? At what point does the FBI acknowledge that you're persecuting a man for his religious beliefs?" Silas took the phone from Howell. "I'll meet you." Everyone started talking at once, Park, Howell, Renner, who'd come running from the house. But Silas ignored them. "Tonight," he said to Kine, "the grain mill. Sunset. Just you and me." "Silas." "No." Howell reached for the phone, but he stepped away. "I want this over," Silas said into the phone. "You want a conversation? Fine. We'll have one, face to face. But after tonight, you leave me alone. You leave my daughter alone. You leave those women alone. We settle this, and then we're done." There was a pause, and when Kine spoke again, There was something like approval in his voice. "A man of courage. I respect that, Mr. Kendrick. It's a rare quality these days. Very well. Tonight at sunset. Come alone. I'll know if you don't. And Mr. Kendrick, bring an open mind. You might find we have more in common than you think. We're both men who value loyalty, who understand sacrifice, who've lost things we loved." The line went dead. The argument that followed was intense. Howell flatly refused to allow it. Parks said it was walking into a trap. Renner was nearly in tears, begging him not to go. "He won't stop otherwise," Silas said quietly. "You said it yourself. He's patient. He'll wait out the FBI protection. He'll wait until I'm vulnerable. This ends now, on my terms, or it never ends. I can't live like this indefinitely. None of us can." "Then we'll be there," Howell said. "Surveillance perimeter, long-range support, tactical team on standby. He'll know, and then the meeting won't happen, and we're back where we started. He's probably watching right now. He knows how many agents you have, where they're positioned, what resources you're using. This man has evaded you for 6 years. You think he doesn't know how to spot surveillance?" They argued for another hour, but Silas had made his decision. Finally, they reached a compromise. He'd wear a wire. FBI would set up at a distance far enough that Kine wouldn't spot them immediately, but close enough to respond if things went wrong. A panic button in his pocket, pressed once for immediate response. And a sniper team on a ridge overlooking the grain mill, just in case. Renner pulled him aside before he left. "Dad, please. This is insane. He's dangerous. What if he doesn't let you leave? Then the FBI will be there in seconds. But Renner, I have to do this. Not just for us, for those women, for everyone Kine might hurt in the future. Someone has to stand up to him. Someone has to look him in the eye and tell him no." She hugged him, fiercely. "Come back to me. Promise. I promise." As the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Silas climbed into his truck. Flint jumped in beside him before anyone could stop the dog. "All right," Silas said, scratching behind Flint's ears. "You started this. Might as well see it through together." He drove toward the old grain mill, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky red and gold, and wondered if he was driving toward resolution or disaster. In his pocket, Anne's photograph pressed against his chest on one side, Kine's medallion on the other, past and present, love and threat, everything that had brought him to this moment. The grain mill sat like a skeleton against the darkening sky. 3 stories of weathered wood and rusted metal, windows broken, walls sagging. It had been abandoned for 20 years, a relic from when this part of Texas still thought it had a future in agriculture. Silas parked 50 yards away and sat for a moment, gathering himself. Through the wire hidden under his shirt, he could hear the faint static of the FBI frequency. They were out there somewhere, watching through long-range optics, listening to every word he'd speak. Flint whined softly, sensing his tension. "Stay," Silas said firmly, opening the door. The dog didn't like it, but he obeyed, settling into the seat with his chin on his paws, watching with worried eyes. Silas walked toward the mill, boots crunching on gravel and broken glass, the revolver heavy in his pocket. The sun was touching the horizon now, throwing long shadows that made the building look even more ominous. He could smell the decay, rotted wood, rust, and something organic that might have been dead animals or just the accumulated waste of 2 decades. The main door hung crooked on broken hinges. He pushed through carefully, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness inside. Kine was waiting in what had once been the main processing floor. Gaps in the roof let in shafts of dying sunlight that illuminated dust motes and made the space feel almost cathedral-like. He looked different than his photograph, older, grayer, but with the same intense eyes that seemed to see through surfaces to something deeper. He wore simple clothes and that silver medallion around his neck, identical to the one he'd sent Silas. His hands were relaxed at his sides, and he smiled when Silas entered, as if welcoming an old friend. "Mr. Kendrick." Kane's voice was warm, welcoming, utterly at odds with the threatening messages of the past weeks. "Thank you for coming. I know this required courage. Real courage, not the performative kind that people display on social media or in courtrooms. The courage to face uncertainty alone. Let's get this over with. You wanted to talk. So talk. Straight to business. I appreciate that. No pretense, no games. That's rare these days." Kane moved closer, his movements unhurried, almost graceful. "You think I'm a monster? I can see it in your face. The FBI has told you stories, kidnapping, imprisonment, manipulation, maybe worse, and you believe them because why wouldn't you? They're the authorities. They wear suits and badges. They're the good guys in this narrative. You held 4 women against their will for years. I offered them sanctuary from a world that had broken them, structure, purpose, belonging, a community where they mattered, where their labor had meaning, where they were part of something greater than their individual suffering." Kaine's voice was reasonable, almost gentle. Yes, there were rules. Community requires discipline. Families have rules. Churches have rules. Countries have rules. But prison? He shook his head slowly. Prison is what you live in, Mr. Kendrick. Alone on your land, clutching memories of a dead woman, going through motions of a life, maintaining property instead of building a future. That's a cell you built yourself, and you locked the door from the inside. At least I chose it. Did you, or did grief choose it for you? Kaine's voice was gentle, almost kind, which made it worse somehow. I've studied you carefully. Lost your wife 3 years ago to cancer. Watched her deteriorate over 18 months. Retired from your work. Moved out here to her family's old land. Isolated yourself. Your daughter worries about you constantly, calls every week, tries to draw you back into the world, but you resist. You're dying slowly, Mr. Kendrick, and calling it living. At least the women I gathered, they were alive. They had purpose. They mattered to each other. The words stung because they touched truths Silas had been avoiding, thoughts that came to him in the dark, hours before dawn when sleep wouldn't come. But he kept his voice steady. This isn't about me. It's about you trying to control people who wanted to be free. Free. Kaine smiled sadly, as if the word itself was naive. Tell me, where are they now? Bridget is with her sister, paralyzed by trauma, unable to work, dependent on charity and government assistance. Constance is in therapy 3 times a week, jumping at shadows, unable to trust anyone. Faye relapsed, did you know that? Back on pills within a week of her freedom, trying to numb the reality of a world that doesn't care whether she lives or dies. And Linnea won't speak to anyone, won't leave her room, won't eat unless forced. That's the freedom you gave them, Mr. Kendrick. That's the gift you bestowed. Silas felt sick. You're lying. Am I? Call Bridget. Ask her. Ask her how many nights she wakes up screaming. Ask her how many job applications she's filled out and been rejected from because of the gap in her employment history. Ask her if she feels free. Kine spread his hands. The world chews up broken people, Mr. Kendrick. It always has. The strong survive, the weak suffer. I put them back together. I gave them purpose, community, safety, a place where they belonged. And yes, I expected commitment in return. Wrong. Is dedication to something greater than yourself wrong? You expected ownership. You treated them like property. I treated them like a shepherd treats his flock, with care, with guidance, with protection from dangers they couldn't see or understand. Kaine touched the medallion at his throat. You don't understand because you've never built anything. You worked construction, following other people's blueprints, executing other people's visions. You maintain your dead wife's land, preserving what was rather than creating what could be. But you've never built something from nothing, never gathered broken souls and forged them into a community that functioned, that thrived, that gave meaning to lives that had none. A community that 4 people tried to escape from. 4 people, Kaine corrected carefully, out of 37 who found peace and purpose under my guidance. 4 who were confused, frightened, manipulated by outside influences, people who didn't understand our purpose, who couldn't see beyond the shallow freedoms of a corrupt world. Like you. He moved closer, and Silas's hand went instinctively to his pocket. Easy, Kaine said, noting the movement. His smile didn't waver. I'm not going to hurt you. I don't need to. Violence is what weak men resort to when words fail them. I just want you to understand something. Those women, they were mine to guide, to protect, to save from themselves and from a world that had already chewed them up once. You took them. You disrupted years of careful work, years of progress and healing and transformation. You destroyed something beautiful and called it rescue, and the media made you a hero for it. If it was so beautiful, why did they run? For the first time, anger flickered across Kaine's face, a crack in the smooth facade. His jaw tightened and his eyes went hard. Because people are weak. Because the world offers easy comforts and empty promises. Because sometimes the flock needs to be reminded why they need the shepherd. A sheep doesn't understand that the fence protects it from wolves. It only sees restriction. That's why the shepherd must be strong, must be willing to make hard choices. They don't need you. They never did. No? Kaine's voice hardened, the warmth evaporating. Then why are they falling apart without me? Why is Bridget having nightmares every night? Why did Faye relapse? Why won't Linnea speak? I gave them structure, purpose, meaning, a reason to wake up every morning. You gave them chaos and called it liberation. I gave them choice. Choice is an illusion for people strong enough to use it. For everyone else, it's just a burden they're not equipped to carry. Kaine stepped back, his composure returning. I didn't bring you here to argue philosophy, Mr. Kendrick. I brought you here to make an offer, a generous one, considering what you've cost me. Silas waited, saying nothing. Help me rebuild, Kaine continued. You have credibility now, public, trust. You're the hero who saved 4 missing women. People will listen to you. Help me reach others who need saving. Use your story to open doors. In return, I leave you alone. I leave your daughter alone. I forget this entire unfortunate situation. We become partners instead of enemies. Think about it, your voice, my vision. We could help so many people. Silas stared at him, genuinely shocked. You actually believe what you're saying. You actually think you're helping people. I know I am. I've seen the transformations. I've seen people arrive broken and leave whole. Or they did, until interference destroyed what we'd built. Then you're delusional. And I'm done here. He turned to leave, and Kaine's voice followed him, all warmth gone now, cold and sharp as January wind. You're making a mistake, Mr. Kendrick. The FBI can't protect you forever. Resources are finite. Attention spans are short. Eventually this becomes yesterday's news and you're just an old man alone on a farm. Again. And I have time. I have resources. I have people who believe in me absolutely, who would do anything I asked without question. You have what? A dog and a daughter and a piece of dirt in the middle of nowhere? Silas stopped at the door but didn't turn around. I have something you'll never understand. I have people who choose to care about me, not because I manipulated them or trapped them or convinced them they're broken and only I can fix them, but because that's what real connection looks like. That's what real community looks like. Not control, not ownership, just people choosing each other freely, every day. He walked out into the twilight, leaving Kaine standing alone in the ruins, and didn't look back. 2 months after the confrontation at the grain mill, Silas stood on his porch watching autumn ease into the Texas landscape. The heat had finally broken, and the mornings carried a coolness that made coffee taste better and work feel less like a burden. Kaine was in federal custody. The meeting had given the FBI what they needed, his voice on tape making statements that, combined with testimony from the 4 women and evidence gathered from his network, built an airtight case. His followers had scattered when news broke of his arrest. Some cooperated with investigators. Others simply disappeared, perhaps to find another shepherd to follow. The trial would be long and complicated, but that wasn't Silas's concern anymore. He'd given his testimony at the preliminary hearings, weathered another brief storm of media attention, and then gratefully retreated back to his quiet life. Except it wasn't quite as quiet anymore, and he was surprised to find he didn't mind. Rena visited every other weekend now instead of calling from a distance. She'd started bringing her boyfriend, Marcus, a firefighter with an easy laugh and kind eyes. They'd sit on the porch with Silas, talking about everything and nothing, and sometimes Anne's name would come up, naturally, without the weight of grief crushing the conversation. The four women had stayed in touch. Bridget called every few weeks, updating him on her progress. She was back in school, studying social work. Constance had reconnected with her late husband's family and found unexpected support. Faye was 18 months sober and working at a recovery center. And Linnea was learning to speak again, slowly, through art therapy that let her express what words couldn't yet capture. They'd asked to visit, all four of them together, one last time before they each moved forward with their rebuilt lives. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon in late November, pulling up in Bridget's borrowed SUV. They looked different than they had in the hospital, healthier, stronger, more themselves. They brought food, stories, and something wrapped carefully in cloth. They sat on the porch, this unlikely group brought together by survival and chance, sharing a meal while Flint moved between them, collecting affection and dropped food with equal enthusiasm. "We wanted to thank you properly," Bridget said as the afternoon shadows lengthened. "All of us together. For everything you did. For seeing us when the world had stopped looking." "You don't need to thank me," Silas started, but Constance interrupted gently. "Yes, we do. Let us do this." Faye unwrapped the cloth bundle, revealing a handmade quilt. It was beautiful 12 squares, each one telling a story. The valley where they'd survived. The wooden cross they'd carved. Flint, rendered in careful stitches. Silas's homestead. The hospital. The courtroom where they'd testified. And 6 more squares showing their new beginnings. Bridget's textbooks, Constance's grandchildren, Faye's sobriety coin, Linnea's paintings, Rena's face, and finally, a sunrise. "We each made 2 squares, Linnea said softly, her voice still hesitant but growing stronger. "To show where we've been and where we're going. We wanted you to have it. To remember." Silas took the quilt with hands that weren't quite steady. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Hours and hours of work, stitches that spoke of patience and care and healing. "It's beautiful," he managed. "Thank you. You gave us our lives back," Bridget said, and there were tears in her eyes, "not just by finding us, by standing up to him, by refusing to let him win. You showed us what real strength looks like, not control, not domination. Just quiet courage and doing the right thing, even when it's hard." They talked until evening, sharing stories and plans and hopes. Constance was thinking about writing a book. Faye wanted to start a foundation for survivors of coercive groups. Linnea had been accepted to art school. Bridget would graduate next spring. As they were leaving, Bridget hung back for a moment. "Are you okay?" she asked Silas quietly. "Really okay? I know these months have been hard." Silas thought about it honestly. Was he okay? He still missed Anne every day. He still carried her photograph in his pocket. But something had shifted. The grief was still there, but it had made room for other things, connection, purpose, even moments of unexpected joy. "I'm getting there," he said. "For the first time in 3 years, I think I'm actually getting there." After they left, Silas sat on his porch as darkness fell, the quilt draped over his lap. Flint lay at his feet, chin resting on his boots. The sky was clear, stars beginning to emerge, and there was a peace to the evening that felt earned rather than empty. He looked out at his land, at the pecan groves silvered by moonlight, at the familiar landscape he'd almost convinced himself was enough. It was enough, But it didn't have to be everything. There was room now for other things, for people, for connection, for living instead of just surviving. He pulled out Anne's photograph, studying her face in the porch light. "I think you'd like them," he told her memory. "The women, Rena's boyfriend, the person I'm trying to become. I think you'd be proud." The photograph didn't answer, but somehow the silence felt less empty than it used to. Flint stirred, looking up at him with patient, knowing eyes. The dog who'd started everything by refusing to ignore what others would have missed. The loyal companion who'd reminded him that hope wasn't something you lost, it was something you chose to hold on to. "Good boy," Silas said, scratching behind Flint's ears. "Best boy." Inside, his phone buzzed. A text from Rena, "Home safe." "Love you, Dad," he typed back. "Love you too." Another text from Bridget, "Thank you for everything. You changed our lives," he replied. "You changed mine too." Because it was true, he'd thought he was saving them, but in some essential way they'd saved him too. Silas stood, carefully folding the quilt. Tomorrow he'd return to his normal work, but it would feel different now. Less like going through motions and more like living with purpose. Behind him, Texas night settled in with its familiar sounds, whined through dry grass, the distant call of an owl, the creak of old wood, the sounds of home, the sounds of life continuing, the sounds of a man who'd found his way back from isolation, one small choice at a time. "Some people spend their whole lives looking for purpose," he said quietly to the night. "Mine found me." He opened the door and went inside, Flint following close behind, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring.